당도 태거침비기 최년년 제다 장주선바 남기 semja tamjigi duna sanyo kopan tobar shuwa sibigi janju sem kie tsewe jelya zo nyamlen che de karchi wasin jimbe nyamlen suje nyamlen sube nyamlen zunje nyamlen samdengi shiragi nyamlen pashin rugi nyamlen zo doschine nangores andi zada nganzo ngazu ine an chigi di nashin je semja tam sanyo kopan tobar ben jamba dan zewa dan ninje samda denegi gang tubu komya dene simcha tam sanyo kopan tobar shuwa simbe samla kiya na nga zuyne di tola chik pashin juki nyamlen delia dus che che kukure che dene zada nga zu kisi ma shen da sube nyamlen kala leche da sube nyamlen na ya rinpa sum ka sore nyoba le chimeni be seba se da dunga dando lembe seba se da chela nge simi seba se che din da sum na ne da nga zu dunga dang lengi seba se kisi din ma
Good evening. So Mahayana Dharma is distinguished by being the motivation of a being who is striving to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings without exception. So that is the mind of bodhicitta. And that's another component of the Mahayana Dharma is the practices that the bodhisattva engages in. And these we know generally as the 6 perfections, that of generosity, ethical restraint, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. So we ourselves who aspire to become a bodhisattva, to develop the path of bodhicitta within ourselves, we should train our minds in the same way that bodhisattvas have done, and engage in the practices that they do in accordance with our capacity. We should train in cultivating love and compassion within ourselves, and we should thereby train in the perfections of generosity and so forth. So that is also the context that we've been looking at the Dharma teachings here for some months now, and we are currently looking at the third of the 6 perfections, that of patience. And of the 3 divisions of patience, we've looked at the first 2. The patience of disregarding harm done to you by others, and the patience of willingly accepting suffering that arises in one's own continuum. The third type of patience, which we'll come to tonight, is the patience of conviction with respect to the Dharma.
Sem juwa daliya, sem liya sugyo dayagi ko shigyo wada sem li yaga duwa sem la nga zugi rik yagi rik dan duwa rik rang shen niga la penbi rik samlo dan rang shen niga la nebi ki samlo rik pa yawa che che dan rang shen niga la penbi rik di samlo dang kore di ya nipa cher dang kore yaane nipa cher dang dan di ya galis dang kore yaane yado sam tabe ko gomshi te che gomche ne ko nipa che chukore dine zang 저기 sem juwa dana ko zoro sungro de dine zang anzu che nyamlen che se de anzu sem yaga di anzu gomshi nipa ya cher da ya le sem ye rashi ni le ne ke samlo di ma me ba so ye ki dus chen di ko sungro ba dang zo.
What does it mean to practice the Dharma, to be a Dharma practitioner? It means to be someone who's engaged transforming our mind from unwholesome ways of thinking to wholesome ways of thinking. Or to express it differently, developing all the ways of thinking that bring benefit to oneself and others, and turning away from the ways of thinking that bring harm. And how is this done? It's not through the complete abandonment and the development of complete development of one type and abandonment of the other, but rather it's a process of transformation where one develops habituation with a particular way of thinking and weakens habituation to another way of thinking. Or again, to express that slightly differently, one develops the strength of a particular way of thinking and weakens the strength of another way of thinking. So here we're developing the strength or our habituation to wholesome or virtuous ways of thinking, and weakening the strength or our habituation to unwholesome or non-virtuous ways of thinking. This is how we transform our mind, and transforming our mind is the meaning of practicing the Dharma.
Jiki Gyatso nale semgam ripa sayade, jisa semla kangara che, anjik semga ripa tingkuye sayade samno tangtang korne, jik lapche kyapche, jiki duhche nangan juki semla dus kanga sayage, semje kanga di sayage, ananga semgam ripa ithone jik yungkorwa che. Tene za dinga semgam ripa chakore, semgam ripa nande semgam ripa pe ting saboro chakore danganzo.
In society, when we recognize our suffering, our mental suffering, we will go and see a skilled professional. We'll go and see a psychologist so as to gain guidance in how to overcome our mental difficulties. That is the process that we are undergoing here as Dharma practitioners. We're looking fine detail at our inner workings and how to transform them and engaging in this process of transformation.
Shengi mi benang rangle shen mi shanda chi sosolia nyoki kanga chi nyoki che sosolia nga sema chi kanga chi yungurwa chi kanga dene chi yungurwa chi la kanga khare yungurwa sene chi ki sosu gu lu gu jong chu be gen che ne na zo be kanga ane chi sosu ge nyema ge che sha bo nyema ge no ju ji yu dene ge sam dene ge ya ne ya do sam da che sem la kanga yo da yang 저기 지게 현례 판도 주바다 현기 된다래 현례 판도 주야다 근데 저기 최념는 제야래 야 되네 전에 강아지 용거로 와 되네 강아여도 삼락하는 스탄고 그래서 현다기 네버기 이제 소소도 강아여도 삼락하는 스탄고 그래서 진짜 되네게 삼단하지 다양한 직가별라 직라는 가려운 것은 아주 최념는 제발이야 이제 제야기 되바메 제뒤에 메딩에 되냐 메딩에 되네 용거로 와 Dene yodo, ane ka samla kanas, kanga dene sikledu samla kanas tangure sayadi, suwe nyamle digi di samla tanghadi shigoro wada, samla tanghadi shigore.
I mentioned a moment ago that the meaning of practicing the Dharma is transforming our mind. Well, the meaning of the practice of patience is transforming problems onto the path, transforming problems into mental paths. So the problems that we have to transform come from three different sources. There are those that come from others, from people around us. That's the first source of our problems. The second source is not from those that we encounter, but our own inner turmoil, our own way of thinking. So for example, if we're tormented by guilt, we are tormented by guilt that we feel, not necessarily from how someone is behaving towards us right now. Or, also included here, is our mental suffering that arises from physical illness. So this isn't coming from a person or a situation around us, but is solely to do with ourselves. So this is the second source of our problems. The third is when we're trying to develop the Dharma within us, and we're experiencing inner difficulties, or when we're expressing our intent of the Dharma with others, in other words, where we're trying to help others and we experience problems. And to do with each of these three sources of suffering, there is a practice of patience. With the practice of patience meaning transforming problems onto the path. So where problems come from others, the practice of patience is to transform this in our mind, transform it into mental paths. Where problems arise from our own inner turmoil, The practice of patience is now with the second source to transform this into the path. And where the third source of suffering, that when practicing or developing the Dharma, here, all those problems and difficulties and sufferings, we transform into the path, transform into the mental paths that eventually lead to enlightenment.
지생기 녀바 흉구여바나 기기여바나 땅아 쇠보 공구여스네 지게 녀바 딜레파 맞아 탑시 그서 녀바도 마양게 탑시 마다와체 안가 쇠보 공구여세 되되베나 용치므라 그래 벤 미지기 베니수면다게 주서 지금 따라 슈갈리기여바나 아 쇠보 공구여선 두신 세되베나 용로와 지난 딜레 응아주게 디 마양게 탑시 맞아 죄고도 가르치고도 탑시 제와디 제고 그래 다 네발에 지면이 배서 봐야 돼. 데네기 네발이야도 배가 수보 공부에서는 야 구되고 나 같이 제나 제주주도 되고 딜 순고 말에. 나 먼저기 되게 마야기 원고지 용해야 가서 탑시 제고 배주셔야지. 나 미션지 가서야 직 교과지 슈베는 슈지 라바다 가서 수보를 마치 쇠베나 난 휴사로 하다 나도 나사로 와서 동아 연구하러 와다. 그래서 난 저게 다 되는 녀도 qabla 당아서 삼로 가르당 고를 해서 그렇다. 당아서 넘유지당 가르 삼로 갈래 그러서는 미들을 콘랑 거로 빼 두자 나래 미디게 휴송하서 미들을 콘랑 빼 쉬우지 콘랑에 직강하시 치거로 와. 그래서 되는 qabla 양아서 삼로 가르당 고를 람나 미들을 콘랑 하나 아니 먼저 낮에 다루고를 배스네 낮에 다기 말했어. 제가 낮에 말아봐 진짜 더는 섬 나와야 코로나비기 대지 수부 낮에 땅비기 낮에 디가라 셈마기 바차네 셈가네 동아 nembal에 동아 망아 차려서 동아 망아 차고래서 제가 내내 코로나비기 코로디기 아니 되네기 디하 아니 디버시리 디기 대보이나 마음바이나 가서 동아 녀에게 차고래서 미겨 버렸어. 제가 되네 자다 코로나나 동아 매바 차고 말 가서 나즈다 동아 매바 차고 말 다 되네 자다 가서 주볼 미 녀다다 나즈 따서 나즈리고 봐나 다 텔레 삼마 가르당 거스네 되네기 동아디 람도 캐고 그래지 람도 캐고 그래서 다 람도 캐란 가르래 람나 아 되네기 동아 나즈냐 되고 미디기 내가야 녀다다 쉬어야 또도 제바지제 미들이야 라와요 말에 미들이야는 셈 녀모베 샤마도 소마레스 미들에 닝제 셈비 닝제 삼다다 어다 고 데네 수여데 나데 나지데 코 나지디 가고시오 말 디고 나지 수여는 깨왕아마 있는 하나도 데네기 하나래 코저기 지게 데네기 강아 태워가 리해서 리기 디보 다고 그래 디보 다로 제만 만용아 차도 그래 디기도 셈베습니다 안 데네기 녜디 수여버 공부할 때네 안 데네기 수여버 공부 있는 코 맞아 수여버 공부도 있나 아는 안할래 개화세 거래스 달바다 템지기 먹고 바토에 규체 거래 아는 아주 개화치 많이 야보야 규체 거래 안데 이게 개화세거디 야고도 와서 비기 되네게 동아디게 생기 녀바 소소래 강아 제바이나 되네게 강아 제세베 강아디 두스지네 셈레 되네 삼다바이나 아니 동아 nembal이 말했어 제가 되네 셈슈기 어디 수볼 나지네 직 나지 되 충하로 차을마도 차고래 제가 데네자 삼로 두스당 고르에서지 농할라 녀발레 지메니베 쇠바세지 공고레세디 두스 제바이나 아니 샹게 랑레 녀바 기베네 디간레 동안nembal이 말해서 마야게 탑람 디샤다 안 소소하게 와서 두고요 봐다 안 데네게 샹레 데네 잠니 조금 두고요 봐 안 데네레서 삼다나 개위 낮에 땅에도 개와 두비야겠어 배지 초라 땅샤베인자 지산 동아 람도 켜와서 타 동아디 가르람도 켜와서네 나저 탈바다 탐지기 먹고 바토베기 람리야 야가 철 땅세 거로 지산 동아 람도 켜와서 디스고로 와 대세베님네 세디
Let's take an illustration of suffering. Let's say we're having a physical altercation with someone, perhaps they're hitting us or beating us. Here we must be very clear what is meant by practicing patience. If one thinks to oneself in the moment where one is being beaten that I need to be a good Buddhist and practice patience, and therefore I will forbear this beating and just take it. That's ridiculous. Run away. Hide away from this beating. Get away from this dangerous situation. Don't misunderstand this practice. This is a mental practice. It doesn't mean being a doormat. It means transforming our mind. It means transforming problems onto the path. When one is suffering, it doesn't mean that one must just put up with the suffering, forbear with the suffering. It means deal with the suffering, but in a skillful way. So just to say here as an aside, because there are several synonyms in English for patience, such as forbear or endure. So the point Genla is making is to separate these out from the way in English that we can use this word, these words such as forbear or endure, and misunderstand the meaning or the practice of patience. So going back to his commentary, we shouldn't just forbear difficulty or endure it. We must transform it. This is the meaning, transform it. Because the practice of patience is a mind that is undisturbed in the face of adversity. It's not a suffering mind. It's taking a situation that would otherwise lead to suffering, would have before led to suffering, for example, or for others, transforming it onto the path. What does it mean to transform something onto the path? Take something that is a cause of suffering and transform it into the causes that will lead to enlightenment. So again, back to the illustration. If someone's beating us, or perhaps they have beaten us and we're experiencing our physical pain from what happened, usually what happens is we get angry at that person. We're physically suffering because our body has been abused, and we are angry at that person who inflicted this harm on us. The consciousness of anger serves no purpose here, no benefit at all. It doesn't heal our physical pain. In fact, it just adds to our misery because we are suffering now. Moreover, the mere consciousness, or this consciousness of anger, is an affliction. Its arisal and dominance leads to the accumulation of negative karma, the causes of suffering in the future. So this is the usual way of dealing with such an unwanted situation. So how do we take this onto the path? How do we transform? How should we be patient in such an illustration? How should we transform the suffering onto the path to enlightenment? Through training beforehand. Here we can think in our meditation, should this happen to me, or we recall when it has happened, that person had no freedom. It wasn't a person with free will beating me. It was a person that was overwhelmed by their afflictions. They had no control over themselves. They were suffering because they were angry or they were full of pride. Whatever the affliction was dominating them. And it was that one consciousness within them, that affliction of probably anger, that led them to act in such a way. They were suffering, and they were creating strong causes that would lead to suffering in their future lives too. So here we recognize the source of that altercation was not that person, but rather that one affliction within them that had dominated them, overwhelmed them. So recognizing this, when we recognize this sincerely, we will not be angry with that person. We will recognize it's afflictions that cause harm for all beings. It's afflictions that are the true enemy of all beings. And the affliction was causing suffering to that person and causing them to act in the way that led to me being beaten. Recognizing this, we can let go of any, if this has happened before, let go of any residual anger towards that person. And now, with a more spacious mind, we can move to a second step in how to transform this onto the path to enlightenment. And so with our mind now more spacious, we recognize that when we are beaten, that could only happen to oneself because of negative karma that we had accumulated in a past life and was ripening now. So that negative karmic imprint is exhausted. We won't have to suffer it again. It's exhausted. And it was exhausted in a way that now in our meditation we can see, we can deal with. And we are now dealing with it. So we can think now in the second way, because of the spaciousness that we generated from the first way of thinking, recognizing the person had no freedom, they had no free will, they were controlled by their afflictions. Now, secondly, we see that we've purified non-virtue. And now we come to the third way that we transform this suffering situation into the path, and that is to recognize that right now in this meditation, we are practicing patience. Our mind is not angry, it's not afflicted. Rather, it's spacious, it's undisturbed. We have generated perhaps compassion for the suffering being who beat us. And this too leads to a powerful accumulation of virtue. So right now in my meditation, I'm accumulating vast stores of virtue because I have compassion for a suffering being. And this virtue I've accumulated now is a cause for happiness in the future. So this is the third point in the transformation of the suffering into the path. Similar to the second, in that the second was recognizing that we purified. The third, we recognize that we're accumulating virtue. So here, through these three steps, we can call it one of two things. We have practiced patience, because our mind now is undisturbed in the face of adversity, or we can call it, we've transformed suffering into the path to enlightenment. Because instead of suffering and creating the causes for suffering, we've transformed it into the path to enlightenment. We're creating causes that will lead to our achievement of enlightenment. This is how one practices patience.
내가 저기 표저디 견주에 제가 저기 세버 공부에서는 견주에 가지나 어디 견디 저기 파 견세 맞춰봐 있나 소소 경험하기로와 제가다 편익이 검주로 제가 소소기 베네사자단 강바다 되니 걸 검주자다 요라 리기로와 지나 저버자다 질레베네 지 표저 저버자데 소소기 콩을 나봐 있네 콜야 저버디 매버서 두고요 바다 아니 콩을 말아봐 있네 매버서 두고야 되네 가야 말와 제가 콩을 말아봐 소소 표저기 견주 제베네 소소기 봐 콩을 랑제 파균 파렌로바 있나 아니 거기 견주에 마매버서 두고요 바다 소소 콩을 말아봐지 셈나 아니 흘려제 콩을 말아봐지 아니 콜야 안지게 두스체네 안주게 파 아니 견디 매비게 렌잡나 아니 콜 매버서 두고 매바 되네 가야 말아 니가 찍어로 매버서 두고 와 되네 말아 되네 인자 다 되네기 신기 견주 제베네 아니 가르치고 그러선 파 콩을 말아봐지 세보콤 세다 콩을 랑나 세보콤 마투바래 제가 콩을 말아봐지 되바 있나 세보콤 바래 세보콤 투바래 콩을 말아봐지 되네 콩을 말아봐 토네 무인의 수기들 장진기 토네 콩을야 견세지야다 렌제야다 어두신 죄바 제제야디 아니 지게 어두신에 강아세야디 아주 탑람 두시고 그래서 그러다네 콩을 라바네 디바샤로 그래야 돼 아니 디바차게 돼서 디지겨 말해서 다 삼다나 두스당 고래서 진짜 고래서 거라나
Every week when we're together, I encourage you to engage in meditation on the topic that I'm presenting. And with patience, it is extremely important to meditate on the topic, because we know from our own experience, once anger has arisen, we are overwhelmed. It's really difficult then. In fact, it's not possible then, whilst anger is overwhelming us, to have an undisturbed mind. Clearly, these two are contrary. If we are angry, our mind is not undisturbed. But equally, those who have trained well, when the they are in situations that we would find intolerable, and our pride and anger would arise, their mind stays undisturbed. And therefore they are not angry. Because these two are contrary, you cannot have a peaceful mind and an angry mind at the same time. So therefore, before one encounters difficult situations, one needs to have trained our mind. So here, we sit on our meditation seat, we recall difficult situations that we've had with others, we recall how we dealt with it, maybe even recall the feeling that we had, and you take it onto the path in the ways that I've just mentioned. And you do this with the same situation again and again, especially if it's a general kind of situation one encounters from time to time. To recall actual situations. And then, through training one's mind in these three ways, one will have a very different perspective of the person who caused one's harm, and a very different perspective on how it's skillful to react next time. Then, when one's trained well like this, when one is faced with adversity, one will not come back with a sharp retort or a put down. Rather, with an undisturbed mind, one can skillfully deal with the situation. And then, when one is in the same situation as one was previously, instead of getting angry and creating non-virtue, one's mind's undisturbed. And virtue is created. Because in that moment, when someone is being unreasonable and abusive towards one, one's mind is undisturbed. Because one recognizes this is a suffering being with no freedom. One recognizes that this is only happening because of my karma, and therefore one's purifying. And also one's recognizing that because one is patient and compassionate now for the suffering being, one is accumulating the causes for happiness. So therefore, when one has trained well, in the face of adversity, those three steps of the meditation will naturally arise. No anger, just peace.
Jisang nganzo dini za kudu dela nyoba kin kudu le nyoba kibene kudu de lamsang suba kom tuyage nganzo la des khakbo chagor karsa nganzo jangdor merwa dini za da nganzo do sun sebe nyamlen chigi sede da soso nan chik tu sera chi dini su de kable ya tu chen seba komba ina michi dini chebe ina dele seba komna an magomba ina pa khona laba ina an kyoin kar kar yongudo seba komba ina yenen 가르가르도 신도 제바 삼다 다 삼다 찬양하는 주 두신 어다 쇠고 겁나 연대 통해도 다디 근데 중반에 내들려 코르랑면 선배기 코르랑 말랑와 지기 선배기 데니게 삼노데 안에 양도 따야다 제 현지 영화들을 강아 때 동화지 때문에 데니들 동화지 아당아 뇌선서 미들려 코르시고라면 판도스 게임에 동아리 매바스 투미도 지산 디네자 미텔리아 콜랑이 매 선배기 디네게 강아 때베네 다 강아 때 사바 나서 땅 사쇠 사바이네 네 잘라도 구마 꾸이제 खे 사바이네 땅아 미텔리아 콜라나 네 잘라디 안잔리아요 말에 데자 델리아 콜랑이 매 선배기 디네 갑라 강아 테디 미규네 콜랑이 메다 선배기 삼로도 진에 야네 야네 삼다데 수비 냠네시 오다 두 진에 삼로 야네 야다네 삼로디 슈크쳔보 리기요바이나 레바이나 데네 마오바네 데네 강아 쳇소베네 디코도 델리아 아니 세보콤 투야기 고데스 코르말라이기 캬바 용고라 셈라가제 슈크체여네 데네 갑라 코르말라이 캬바 슈크체용고라 데네 장한저기 녜레네 나제 데네게 강아 마테 녜레네 데네 차바네 디지긴 세베 코르랑메 세베 삼로디 야네 따야디 뉴베 슈크체서야디 게침보레 디사 세베 곰세데 데니스 곰고마도 강아티디 갑라 미니동 따데 갈랑아 세베 곰고에선 데네 뉴스에데네 데네 두 경레마도 디 갈하고르와 지사 데네 산예레네 한저기 두시네 삼로나리아 강 데네게 강아 지산다 강아텐 파코르자오긴 랑메 선베 네게시 콜레 렌 잡고이네 코르 말랑웨 토네 코르 말랑와체 아니 고 템바 라테체데 렌자데 데니 지긴 선베 삼로 지가서 삼두 진에 야네 야두섬 되게 갑라두 진에 삼다야데 데니게 삼드기디 나두 스나데 아니 세베 냠레 네발레 지메니 비 세베 세보 곰바 세데 데 곰 세데 가지고 두 진에 지글로디 야네 양도로 제주도 삼다의 책으로와 온도 책으로와 되는 자 두 제바제 녀레는 검시소가 되게 전부 책을 뒤대다.
Another part to add to this, the training in patience that one really needs to do before one faces difficult circumstances, is to reflect on the benefits of patience and the faults of anger. And this is important because it's relatively easy to see the faults of anger and the benefits of patience. But all too often, though, when anger is arising within us, we certainly don't see a fault in it. We may even believe in certain circumstances it's justified or it's appropriate. We may even afterwards look back and think it was beneficial, made me strong or brave. But when one looks with more detail, we'll see that anger doesn't make one strong or brave. It rather blinds us. It blinds us and keeps us ignorant because we are overwhelmed by an affliction. Wisdom cannot shine through. We cannot respond skillfully. So again, and this has to be emphasized, the practice of patience doesn't mean taking the beating from others, the physical beating, the verbal beating. It doesn't mean just accepting it. Willingly accepting suffering doesn't mean taking a beating. It means accepting that unwanted circumstances come and then transforming it onto the path. So the purpose of this step of the meditation that also needs to be done prior to one experiencing difficulties is to develop a sincere commitment never to get angry. Never to get angry. What one is trying to do in this part of the meditation, what I mentioned previously, was transforming suffering on the path, is being skillful. This step is to give us the capacity to be skillful, not so as thereby not to be angry. We need to develop within us a deep adversity to anger. A deep adversity to anger. And this is where we see that anger is never justified or appropriate. And we then make the heartfelt commitment never to get angry. This gives us the strength of mind, especially whilst we are training, to not get angry and to try and deal skillfully with the situation, to try and rely on our training in meditation and not respond in the way that perhaps we are still habituated to. So this too is a key part of the meditation.
다 나제 주불은 나제 예비게 여바치시 디가래 셈테디게 어당아 지지지 나송아 기우 그디 다기는 아 세교오레샤 셈베 삼다이도 셈테디기 아니 나제디 슈크처럼 셈테게 소스마기와 나제디게 주불 나제디게 강아 여바치갈야 셈테디게 나는 마기와 차제 동하디 슈셰로 거라서 지자 데네자 나제 나바이나 아니 셈제체나 지교 말해서 그러다 다 저거금시도 셈제 맞아봐제 회식 되투고 그래서 셈제 맞아봐 되투고 그래서 지나다 나는 야 셈제 맞아서도 나지데 다이어도네 맨주다 디네 삼마다라고 말다야 제가 저 디네 삼다지 강아지로 디네면 지교 말해서 지나 디네기 맞아봐제 되고 그래 지자디 동화 달랭기 동화 당도 렘바세 디네기 동화디 당도 렘바세 가서 오다 가르삼 땅으로서 오다가 나중에 디 규디 당원에 규사 사와래 규디 사서 저 민고래 개왕아마게 되네게 사셔비 동안용아 레 사바이나 제부등아 다데 나 미임바 집을 다데 탑시 약고 말이야 지 튕기에다 되네게 지기 갑려야 되니 나지 녀데 야고래도 와서나 톱시다지 직전 나지 자도 그래 기신 되니게 나지 조 제부 민제 다들 참 민제 매와 차로 그래 안 다들 마음에 제마 지 용그래다 딜레 다등아 탑교와 지래 나질레네 당아 강아 마 체기로 와 다등아 오수디 갑려 디제 디기도 삼제 안두시네 삼다제 안 되베이나 안 셈리아 셈제기 대삼 담아다지 당교 말해서 두섬 당고 그래제 셈리아 삼다나 나서 자기 말에 디강아 갈레망아 차기래서 진짜 니네자 두시네 레균제게 삼다샤베나 제부 민고래 다 민전 제만은 마녀와 차용한다 디기도 셈베게 대삼다베는 니네 동아 다도 렘바치고 다도 렘바차로 그래서 동아들이야 충충 쇠셔고로 니네 두섬 당고 그래서 두숨 거봐 디양은 저기 녀레네 동아들이 마야니에는 안저게 가빌레 류레 나체다 다마라다 강아요 시디소한테 규기 규 사사웨네 제부디 민고레 규사메나 민기 마레 셈비게 다 균지게 레균제디게 야보라 삼다베네 데네 삼다야리아 안데네게 그시 나체레베네 마델리아 강아페 징아 교르샤 시고르스 삼당메 셈비게 삼로디 야네야도 안저 삼다야디 다 쇠베냠나 쇠보콤바세디 동아다도 림베 쇠보콤세디 녀레네 동아데 마중 녀레네 두치야네야노 삼다 동아디 중어디 레바이나 안 동아디레 셈데 네마 마게데 셈데기네 쳐야마 나즈 자기 말에 세상 딜레 셈데기네 두르에 냥아이데 디부민처죠 제마나 나즈 요모가 차기리 디기도 셈비게 삼다야다 데네게 나즈데 나랑게 뇨네 냠뇨 토네 셴데넬야 뇨하줄야 따디디 안강이 콜이야 잠지 동아 타나 셈베 아니 니지기 투야디 캬브라도 셈베 두스치네 삼다베나 아니 제 동아 달랭이 쇠바세디 또 삼당고래세 지간주 또 중고르와
What presented in these preceding few segments was primarily about the first of the three types of suffering, patience of disregarding harm done to you by others. Now the second type, which is patience of willingly accepting suffering that arises in one's own continuum. So this is where there's not another person before oneself, either physically or verbally giving one a hard time, but rather it's suffering that's coming about from one's own way of thinking, or perhaps one's body. So for example, if one's experiencing illness. So all too often, if one's experiencing illness, our way of thinking, becomes very self-obsessed. Thinking about me, I'm so ill, I'm in so much pain, I can't fulfill all my responsibilities. And we have all these thoughts going around in our head. But if we step back for a moment, especially from a place of distance, like hopefully we are all in good health now, and we look at the situation, when has worry ever led to good health? In fact, worrying just weakens our immune system and mentally hurts us. Mentally, it makes us dispirited, saps our strength of mind. So this second type of suffering, the patience of willingly accepting suffering that arises in one's own continuum, this term willingly accepting, this again, it doesn't mean in the way that I described before, forbearing, being tolerating what's happening, enduring what's happening. It doesn't mean this. One has to transform the situation onto the path to enlightenment. So willingly accepting means accepting the law of cause and effect. This situation, granted, it's unwanted, but it has come about in dependence on the karma I created in a past life. That negative karma has now ripened into the suffering result. There's no surprise there. If a cause is accumulated, a result will follow. So it's no surprise that this unwanted result has now come about. That is what we accept. This is cause and effect. Now we transform this onto the path, recognizing that karmic seed that is ripened now is eliminated, and it's been eliminated in a life form where we can deal with this. We live in a country with excellent healthcare, and hopefully we can deal with this well. Could have ripened in a life form where I couldn't have dealt with it, but I also have the capacity in this life form to deal with my mind, to transform my mind. So what we're doing here, with willingly accepting the suffering, is we're reminding ourselves of cause and effect, and we're doing so to lift our mind, to strengthen our mind, which is the opposite outcome of thinking, why me? This is so unfortunate. It's always me. How am I going to cope with all my responsibilities now that I'm ill, for example? So rather, we remind ourselves of cause and effect. We lift and strengthen our mind. And we also, within this, we can generate love and compassion for those who are suffering in a similar way. Love and compassion, especially for those who haven't yet developed the skill to transform their mind. They haven't yet become habituated to skillful ways of dealing with life's hardships. And also, we can use this as motivation to turn ever further away from accumulating non-virtue and to strive for virtue. And in brief, what we're doing with the second type of suffering is we are preventing ourselves from over-conceptualizing or ruminating about ourselves and our problems and our difficulties. And rather, we're transforming them into the path to enlightenment.
ane danga shanle roba kanga shiwutu be de mason be che dene ade gyobache da chige denu tu samdane ane midel yanga roba cheguda gidina roba chegudu da de yawo kyune mindusum gidinga roba che moga gidi tabsit targresan be samdawena manzo semlia deshi kanga ji che chaware de an ngad dene ge samlutane Deji samtabi deji kanga chegyori meba chagi mares. Chisna dik deji kanga chebi kanga ya samnochi denis nado kanga manga li gores. Chisna dene yenza dene kabla ya nga zo karchi gores. Dunga di dangdo ling gores. Dangdo ling samlo kartang gorela, dangdo ling samlo kartang gorela abdu. O danga del ya shen ya robo chiya gi di kanga cheba dede yagoro wasanga shen lo robo chene kanga cheba res. Chisna ne kanga chedi dene shen le roba che di couple de kanga gaze chebe na tigi dusti karasene ya sanje da jensen ba chasan shen le roba chene tarbada sanje go ba tu gore min shen le roba sanje gi ani soye de shen le pemba du gore song gore chasan ge sanje soye de ka du gore ni chue nyamlen chi gore chasan konzule ping gore chasan tinga kanga gaze na shen le roba che da dene ki tole ya nga kanga chebe na gyawajune be yakore mahopane dene shan pembi chedu tinge kale ka tsina jabgin sabi samlo dijita shabaina ma juge semthedi samgi thone an jige kangadi chungchung charu soidu gores ani ndusche na nga zo chue chibe nyamlen chibe kapline kanga theben odanga dene ge kanga thena be dijitu kangadi webare kidina chue nyamla ja tharbada thamje chibe go thoye gi dandale kale ka jegna jagin sambe samda shabaina kangadi chungchung charu gores jesa digingi 저기 개회 개화사고래 개화침부스 최제게 냠는다 셴레 펜버드비게 잠니지 고미알이야 삼로디tin 누버처던 거 제가 디네자 이게 달바다 탐지기 보고 봐도발로 규체고래 삼로도스탄 거래 해야지 직제 는 데네가 강아마제 녀레는 아주 셈레 곰시 곰야디 세바 곰세 단들레 곰세데 니샹리아 두스네 까까 시스로바 제바 마오바데 데네 지로바 제제 강아 체베네 데네 강아라 마셈 강아 균에 삼메 아 셈베 데네 강아 존등이 지 게디 강아 같이 제나 지기야 셈베게 생기 된다 나 개어 두제 곰자다 개어 기주제 양아 강아 같이 체베네 디 강아 디딩이 지기 강아 링기 지기 셈베게 삼다샤번 두 삼다바나 야네 야도 삼다바네 마오바나 데네기 안지기 체베네 강아 삼고 말레스 지상 수비 냠는 제데 곰야디 두스천 삼당 고레서 제가 동아 달랭이 수바 냠는 제다도 송고로다 아데 Dunga dila leta mangbodowa, Deji Lule Nazayona, Dangan down the Samdan. Dade de Gasan Shanlia, Pember Dupje Ranga, Kasem, Lusimla Kangatea, Chen Yamniji Lusimla Kangatidu, did Dunga down the Lena, some to Stangores. The Sumba made that in Dunga down the Nibahoran, Dunga down and Besse.
Continue to looking at the second division here. When we're helping others, when we're expressing the good intent that we've cultivated in ourselves towards others, we can experience many problems, physical problems or mental problems. For example, we may feel a sense, we may feel the person that we're helping is taking us for granted, or they're not showing gratitude. Could be merely they've forgotten to thank us, or they keep asking us for help and seemingly just take us for granted. And this then can lead us to regretting having helped them. It can lead us to not to want to help them again and thinking, they can just solve their problems themselves. So this may happen whilst we are helping them, but it's really our own way of thinking. It's not from what they're necessarily saying or doing. Or afterwards, recalling when we help them and think, I will never put myself through that again. So these situations we need to deal with skillfully. Because when we are unskillful, we can either have our mind dominated by the situation, ruminating about it, over-conceptualizing, having negative thoughts about the person. Can also have the outcome of serving as an obstacle for us helping them or helping anyone in such a circumstance. This would be a grave error to our spiritual, the expression of our spiritual development. So rather, we need to willingly accept suffering such as this. So we need to be patient and willingly accept suffering such as this. And again, willingly accept means to take suffering and transform it. Take suffering onto the path, transform it onto the path. And we can do so through thinking skillfully in the following way. When interacting with others, it is common to experience difficulties, whether physical or mental, such as my body being exhausted, or mentally exhausted or frustrated, annoyed. This is not unusual. This is normal. There's no need to fight against what is normal, rather to accept it and to transform it. Because, for example, my role models, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, when they're interacting with ordinary beings respond in ordinary ways, just like is happening with me now. So I want to be like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I will therefore persevere with this. I will see this obstacle in its true light as actually something not very important. They forgot to say something, maybe an expression wasn't so nice, or I'm not able to engage in what I want to do, but I'm having to do this. Whatever it may be, I can deal with this. It really, in the bigger scheme of things, it's not important and will be forgotten about soon enough anyway. So here, thinking like this, quickly we can make our mind light and spacious, and we can then, with this broader perspective, generate love and compassion for others. See the importance of what we are doing, that it does make a difference, maybe only a small difference, but nevertheless a difference. And because our attitude is positive, we are now accumulating virtue, and that is precious. Because that virtue we can dedicate in skillful ways so that we can keep helping others ever more. And as with all the meditations, especially here, we need to do it when we're in a quiet space and our mind is relaxed. And we do so by recalling past situations where we've encountered problems when, say, trying to help others, and reflect how we could have dealt with it better, more skillfully on a mental level, transform it onto the path. And in particular, before engaging with others, especially those situations where we expect to experience difficulties, pre-plan, pre-prepare, so that when one does experience hardship, it's not a surprise, and one can skillfully deal with it in the moment, and then thereby create vast stores of virtue and be of ever more benefit to others. So now returning to the text. Okay, so we're in the middle of page 42, and we're going to start where we finished last week at the second bullet point. So I'm just going to read what's in the Tibetan. The English is a little padded for clarity, but rather for the oral class, I'll stay with the Tibetan. So, and I read from the second bullet point in the paragraph below. My translation will be a bit different, but the meaning's the same. Furthermore, so from the second bullet point, furthermore, by meditating upon patience when others harm you, your practice of the other perfections develops and matures, and complete enlightenment is attained. And then the paragraph immediately below. So here the translation's a bit different. In accordance with his spiritual instructions, see those who harm one as greatly kind and therefore similar to our Lama, and with patience willingly accept hardships. So I'll read it again. Furthermore, by meditating upon patience when others harm you, your practice of the other perfections develops and matures, and complete enlightenment is attained. In accordance with his spiritual instructions, see those who harm one as greatly kind, and therefore similar to our Lama, and with patience willingly accept hardships. So the first part, which was that second bullet point, which is as I've been presenting already. Furthermore, by meditating upon patience when others harm you, your practice of the other perfections develops and matures, and complete enlightenment is attained. The meaning here is that the practice of patience is indispensable for enlightenment, because without being patient, one cannot practice the other perfections properly, and therefore enlightenment is not possible. Not practicing patience serves as an obstacle to the perfections. So especially in terms of developing them further, developing them towards the attainment of enlightenment. So therefore, the practice of patience and the perfections, the other 5 perfections, are concordant, are in harmony.
제가 상기에 고바 토발라 파신 중에 냠는 소고고래 제가 파신 중에 냠는 소발라 쇠베 냠는 고고래 소고고래 제가 되는 엔자 상기 고바 냠는 제고면자 안다 쇠베 냠는 술티 리고르스 뇌제라티네 리고르스 뇌제 뇌바치 뇌현지여나 델라 쇠보고면 뇌현면은 쇠보고면요 말와 제가 뇌제라 쇠보고배 제가 뇌제라 쇠보고면도 안에 세보금 고거래. 지산 뉴젤로 세보금 베게 고미야데 세보금야데 가서 뉴젤레데 세보금야라고 그래. 지산 곰베 곰비게 담마때 비게 라마따보 토네스 지산 뉴젤이 바 세비 냠면 제기 Lamegi also Labji capture Chunyam do Jeworson, Mason doing on the Yamlin Chebalatine, and the Kiwi Topa get the Tabata Tamjoko to Gorwa. Dina she, Subin Yamlin Jedi, Nuji Telatine, Subin Chevas, Subin, Nuji de Pe, Masig Lama, Lame, Tamwate, Terhan Nashin, and Tinchebonga, Subin Yamlin Chiarayata, and Shanley, Jamin the Comia de Pe, Mase, Yawushu Resha, Sambegi. 판도 침보레샤 선배 삼다체 아니 이게 동화당도 렘베셔 봐. 되게 되게 인자 이 가세나 bedne 강아 같이 태변의 쇠보 고미하다 냠는 지긴 선배 삼다여도 동화당 렘베셔 봐. 사실도 두리야시.
So I read then the translation of that second paragraph again. In accordance with his spiritual instructions, see those who harm one as greatly kind and therefore similar to our Lama, and with patience willingly accept hardships. So as was just mentioned in the sentence above, one has to practice patience in order to attain enlightenment. It is indispensable. In order to practice patience, one requires those who make our life difficult, those who give us problems. We require those people in order to spiritually develop. That is a very different way to relate to people who give us a hard time. And we see them in this light because, as the sentence says, it is because of them acting to us in, for example, an abusive manner, that we can transform that situation, that encounter, into the path to enlightenment. And therefore it's independent on this person and how they're acting towards us that we can spiritually develop. It's independent on how they are acting to us, this harmful way they're acting towards us, that we can spiritually develop and therefore be of ever more benefit to all beings. When we think of it like this person who acts in unwanted and harmful ways towards us, we value the benefit that their behavior, we value the opportunity that their behavior presents us to apply these skillful teachings from our Lama and transform this situation into the path to enlightenment. So here we are valuing someone who's causing us harm rather than deprecating them, talking badly about them, looking at them with harsh eyes. We're valuing them.
That's somebody cholang yesemi seba said. Cholang never simbi seba lavadu. Dandala Karson Sinangajuki gave Chawa Nyamlan Chelia, Dumba Tapoki, this order. Dumba, Meva Shukchimaged.
Of the three types of patience, let's now come to that third. Patience of conviction with respect to the Dharma. So this is the patience one applies when one is striving in the accumulation of virtue.
And the Jiki Jeduki, and Lega de Carina, Jedu Dumbakia, Shuchimboligura, Chesan Cholange Simuseba, so the Jebache, Samota, Jebache, Tundagui, Nisud, how going on to go and Delia Jedu Dumbati Ligres or.
This third type of patience, the patience of conviction with respect to the Dharma. So to expand a little bit on this, it is translated in different ways, and through Genna's explanation here, why it's translated differently will hopefully become clear. So the word for Dharma, the standard word for Dharma, can mean reality. Therefore, it's often translated as patience of conviction with respect to emptiness. And the word here the word conviction, patience of conviction with respect to the Dharma, conviction can also mean realize. It usually means conviction or determination, but it carries the meaning of to realize. So therefore, this is also often translated as patience with regard to realizing emptiness. Neither translation is mistaken. Both are correct. But more generally, and in accordance with the explanation in our commentary, it was not just about emptiness, but about the Dharma. But how we can understand the two together is that as one gains realization of the Dharma or greater conviction in the Dharma, which means also coming to understand how things abide in reality, one will strive ever more to realize the Dharma. So therefore, the word we have as conviction also carries the connotation of realize, and the word Dharma, as in Dharma in general, also carries the connotation of emptiness.
Konjo sumda sangye jan semgyo tu samgye mi kyaba thongde gyase gyo joba dan dami be donla mwebe gone denamla lobde chola nge semgyo sebe nyamnen she tabane che gwe de sen.
Again, I've now read what we have with the Roman numeral 2, different translation. I'm only going to read it once because our time is short, but the meaning is not vastly different. Having recognized that the power of the three jewels and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is inconceivable, with a longing to train by means of an eagerness in the activities of Bodhisattvas and a determination for the meaning of selflessness, wholeheartedly practice the patience that is certain with respect to the Dharma.
Dāngwā kia hōre, gōnchō sum yu gōnchō sum dāngwā kia wadi, jizān jeba che gōnchō sum ki sāng yu gōnchō da, chū gōnchō ki, dūng gōnchō ki, yuñ dēn di tōng yō du, an dēli ya, hā gō yō du, dēli ya dāngwā ki ki rēs, jizān di dāngwā ki nā dēba ki ki rēs, dēba di dōdō mē ba dēmbu ki ki rēs, jizān dēmbu yō ya ki dōndā chik di rē. Dāngwā la nē dēba. Konjo sumla deva kiya di konjo sum yunden jeba je yunden tong yodu ne konjo sum ya deva di tempu ki greshe.
So within this paragraph, one is recognizing the qualities. There are varying parts. So the first we're going to look at is having recognized that the power of the three jewels is inconceivable. So the full segment is having recognized the power of the three jewels and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is inconceivable. But first looking at the qualities, having recognized the qualities of the three jewels, strong faith of conviction in the qualities of the three jewels arises.
Da sangye dan janju sem sangye dan jasim yu tu samye me tieba tongde ane gyase gyo jeba tang sidu samye me jeba tongde le du da yang sangye gyo yunden jeba che sangye gyo yunden tu dan nuba dan ane chigi parshin chuge nyamlen tar shimba digi pazaya janju sem bige nyamlen parshin chuge nyamlen dan dēnīgē ñamlē tū chēdē kārkārān jīngā tū chēpa chēdū anē sāngyē kē yuandēn dā jēshū sēmbī kē pārchīn chū kē ñamlē yuandēn lā sō pā ngā sō tōng yōng dū anē dī kē sāngyē dā jēshū sēmbā khurān tū yuandē kē sō sū kē tūngā lē chōwā dā xiān lē pāntō chēpē pē ngē jīng nūpa chēmbō shū tōng yōng dū anē kē sē kē chōpa dē lē yā sō sū yī nē ā dēndē jī tōng ngā yā dī chāngī sēmbē dē lē yā jāng dō kē dūmbā lē kē rē sē wā lōp dō kē dūmbā lē kē rē sē.
Okay, so I'll read 2/3 of this part. Having recognized that the power of the three jewels and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is conceivable, with a longing to train by means of an eagerness in the activities of Bodhisattvas. So up to this point. So here one has recognized, firstly, the many qualities of the Buddha's body, speech and mind, as well as firstly, the qualities of the three jewels, then secondly, the qualities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, of their body, speech, mind, and activities. One develops a longing to train in these oneself. So I'll read this part again. Having recognized that the power of the three jewels and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is inconceivable, with a longing to train by means of an eagerness in the activities of bodhisattvas.
Dine dhammi be tuye siro. Dhammi be tuye siro da jizang dhalu meba la jeba cheche dhameba da tongpa nyi toba ina toyondu ane delya ane de gomba la tene da sa tarpa da tamche jiba koba de gomba la toku kudu sempe ha koyodu jizang gomja de dhameba da tongpa nyi de gomyegi gomdigi dunpa changdigi gompe lo de donyegi dunpa di shukchim oda nga di gomgu sempe donyegi dunpa di shukchim ligi de ejira dhamebe don lahasa.
Now we come to the third object. So the first object was the power of the three jewels. The second was that of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as well as their activities. Now we come to the third, and I'll read this first part again. Having recognized that the power of the three jewels and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is inconceivable, with a longing to train by means of an eagerness in the activities of Bodhisattvas, and now the third, and a determination for the meaning of selflessness. So here one is giving rise to a longing to train in three parts. One is through having recognized the qualities of the three jewels. Secondly, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, their great qualities as well as the activities of Bodhisattvas. That's the second object one has given rise to a longing to train in. And here's the third, a determination for the meaning of selflessness. So here one has already been investigating selflessness or emptiness, and in dependence on one's analysis has given rise to a longing to train in this. In other words, to realize it.
Lobdu chela nge singyu sebe nyamnin she tabane chegwe labdu da donda la gonjo sumgyu yende samdande ha jeba che de yende tongyu delia deba je da an sangye da je simbi gyu yende de tongyu delang de di ro yende di ro ji nge kya tobu du nga tobu du simbi gi dongyu dumba je denege dame ba jeba dame be dön tongyu oda di ma di mogom de tab di gomgu simbi gi desolya denege dumba shukchi bu je je delia jangtui gi lo dumba dönyer gi samlo shukchi bo di delane kasa cholange simyu sebi nyamne si or di dene samda du se yane yadu di samdang gore se di sumor wada.
I'll read the last bit of this verse and then the whole thing again, of this paragraph. Wholeheartedly practice the patience that is certain with respect to the Dharma. So here, one has given rise, has reflected on three different objects and given rise to a yearning to strive in the Dharma, in cultivating the Dharma within oneself. And therefore, one's being advised in the last section, wholeheartedly practice the patience that is certain with respect to the Dharma, this third part. So here one is first, having recognized that the power of the three jewels, that's the first. So one's given rise to faith in the three jewels. Then comes the second object, and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are inconceivable, and with a longing to train by means of an eagerness in activities of Bodhisattvas. So here, one's seeing the qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind, and the activities of Bodhisattvas, and given rise to a longing to train in that. Then the third object, and a determination for the meaning of selflessness. So this too is what one wants to train in. So you've got on one hand the path of wisdom, training in selflessness, and then secondly the path of method, the activities of bodhisattvas. So here you can see how this can be translated as patience with respect to Dharma or patience with respect to emptiness. Both are included. Then the last sentence, wholeheartedly practice the patience that is certain with respect to the Dharma.
nyelendo shimju che jebara che samnata an ji sebe phanyo ko ba na phanyo din du sebe ma gom ba che an pha an ji ge semte che ya da an ji pha an ji ne be khon ra la ya da an ji ge nga ju ge ji nyamlen che la ya je ma de le lo che ya da din che be na gyong din du se de ma du she shimju che jeba che ne an ge din na ha ko de an nga samno na la ya o da shen le nu be che be ne pha khon lang me a san be ge de yune khon lang me san be samlo chi ta di ya ne ya no sam ta ya da da ya su su ya ji gang a shen ge duen ru gang a na da chue nyam len che be na da su su ne na ji thon ne ji gang a ji cái thế bên đó, càng ngày thì này thế được cái gì, ở đằng nào càng ngày都是在xem film，在边càng ngày nhắm他吧，xem film吧，把film吧的那找个人几个咩事，那那个有把那现在拍不出吧的，给月教出来，东亚卡子有那，那现在的拍东亚卡子那截图过来，这个多难的把这三百多些呢，伢呢，什么马中搞了呢，伢呢什么大呀的。第那些，那上夜大家就先别个原来地上，第那些情况托不都先别个伢那样都什么大呀？俺大没把些的，公就第那大没把公古的公别个落地，但你把钱当过是别个也这个什么大呀的，第那个什么的，俺就心就结巴结，第那个什么的，伢那样都新先别个，但公呀。公职chế的随便念的是公职chế的也这么结果的，但的那个公职chế吧呢，我就刚开始车队搞不呢，那南上我的之前的这个马来身边，甚至现在判断要马来身边个，起码这边开发用过了，现在在当行这里随便念的别嘛，这行这里还有老有个别去修有点其实当时两个搞的钱呢。这个要是话，当时缺钱呐，刚刚有的怎么子呐，刚刚有的这几个人呢，现在如果去那刚刚的干是一套的呢，这样子贴用过的话，今年贴的够不了，什么当的呢当过的是，现在去送过了的，今年在的随便你们的。也听不清，随便过马桶呢，出什么送土个嘛的话的，就看着现在那边几个没是别，这上面的送土嘛的，干什看着哪呢？现在那边借用自主些的，捐助借用过的，就像出什么送土个嘛的，随便过马桶呢，几每年来借土嘛的，干什现在绕借的，刚好几个没什么个了，那几每随便过马桶呢，确实个讲今年来借了。这或截图嘛，开始呢，大家刚好都得有学生别个上下个话，现在今天是随便你们写的，那我就定义成公报来呀，随便你们过的，但随便你们的拍摄这个你们结包，随便你们有活吃过有活的。
Just to summarize what we've looked at then tonight, because our time is already up. This practice of patience is of supreme importance. I don't need to tell you this, but I will say it anyway. Life is difficult. We experience unwanted situations frequently, and at times it just seems like one's falling on top of the other. We seem sometimes almost overwhelmed by life's difficulties. This is a crucial training for all of us. Starting with one's reflection, recognize this, because we need to accept that as a samsaric being, we will experience suffering. As a samsaric being surrounded by samsaric beings, they will also act to us in ways that are unwanted. This is just a truth one needs to recognize, because not recognizing this weakens us. We need to recognize this and thereby think in accordance with reality. We experience a hard time when we're striving for happiness, such as in attending a teaching or reading a Dharma book or trying to meditate. We experience a hard time when we are with our loved ones, with our family. We experience a hard time when we're watching sports and they're not doing so well. We experience a hard time when we're with our friends, hoping for a good time. Problems come in all situations. We need to accept that. And we need to train our mind so that they are no longer problems to us. Train our mind recognizing that when we experience problems from others, that it being a problem is not something, it's not how we have to perceive it. If we train well now, in a time when our mind's a little bit calm and spacious, quiet in our room, then we can become skillful. And we don't need to get frustrated and angry. We can understand that the person who's speaking to us in an abusive way, who's acting towards us in a way we don't want, is overwhelmed by the afflictions. They are suffering. They have no free will. They are not a valid recipient of our anger. They have no freedom. They are under the control of their habituation to afflictions. We can also recognize that then that this situation has come about in dependence on karma, so we are purifying now. Use that second step to bring joy. Use the third step then to say that now if we are being patient, we are accumulating virtue, especially if we are being compassionate towards the suffering being before us, not grasping at what they're saying, understanding that they have no freedom, that in a sense, they don't mean what they say. It is just the anger being expressed. It's not that person speaking with volition or with free will. In this way, we can be spacious and calm, compassionate towards them and accumulate virtue. But we need to train like this beforehand. It's not possible in the moment when anger has arisen. We need to train beforehand. And part of that training too, it's recognizing the faults of anger and the benefits of patience. To come to the point where we develop a deep aversion to anger, so that should it start to arise within us, we quickly with introspection recognize it, and with mindfulness we will call the antidote and dispel it. That will come about if we've developed this aversion to our true enemy, our own afflicted minds. And then in terms of the second type the second object for our patience, our own inner turmoil. So I gave an illustration in relation to illness, but in your meditation apply it to other situations of your own inner turmoil. Perhaps a guilt that you've been holding on to, or resentment that you've been holding on to. So this is a way of thinking that's just causing you pain, bringing you down. It's not helping one develop spiritually. It's not helping us benefit others. In fact, it's almost certainly holding us back. So here, cultivate patience. Utilize the meditation I presented earlier to transform this onto the path to enlightenment. Transform what is suffering and what is creating the causes for suffering in the future. Transform it by making our mind positive and virtuous, and thereby accumulating causes that will lead us to enlightenment. And then the third type of patience is applied to the Dharma. So here we look at our obstacles in practicing the Dharma. For example, studying emptiness can be really difficult to understand, difficult to hold concepts in mind. We forget things we thought we learned. We need to be patient with this. Accept this is to be expected for ordinary beings, so we pick ourselves up and we continue. Or we've been meditating on a topic, perhaps patience, for a long time, and we still find ourselves angry. It's okay. We have a strong habituation to anger. Nothing surprising then that we're angry. But we know that it's impermanent and our mind is flexible, and eventually we will be able to be free of anger. So be patient. If we recognize that we have an affinity to laziness or procrastination, or we often prioritize all the many, many activities, the limitless activities in our life, here too is an object to be patient towards, and be patient here through transforming this onto the path, recognizing the faults of laziness, procrastination, and not prioritizing our spiritual training. Transform that onto the path by recognizing the benefits of utilizing our time differently. So that's then a brief summary of tonight. We'll need to end it there then.